Okay, this is the third program on the somatic nervous system, and this one will deal with sensory information in the eye. And so we're going to discuss the three layers of the eye: the fibrous tunic, the vascular tunic, and the nervous tunic. Okay, so the fibrous tunic is the outer layer of the eye. It's referred to as fibrous because it's primarily collagen. This includes the sclera and the cornea. They're both made of collagen, although the cornea is kind of modified so it's transparent and it bulges in the anterior so it begins the focusing of light. The second layer of the eye is the vascular coat, and this lies just inside of the sclera, and in the back of the eye, this is the choroid, contains blood vessels and pigment to absorb excess light. In the front part of the eye, this includes the lens, which finishes bending light, the ciliary body, which are uh, muscles that change the shape of the lens to focus light. So they're attached to the lens by the suspensory ligaments. And then it also contains the iris, which lies in front of the lens, which controls how much light enters the eye. Then the nervous coat includes the inner lining of the eye. That's the retina. The retina contains the receptor cells and it contains nerve cells that are going to take the information back via the optic nerve. There's a little blind spot here where the optic nerve enters the eye. There's also some portions of the retina that are different from others, and so we'll talk about those. Okay, so those are the three layers of the eye. The eye is divided into an anterior cavity, which has some fluid in front of the lens called the aqueous humor, and then the posterior cavity back here, which contains, again, another fluid-filled space, the vitreous chamber. That's a gel-like material. And the fluid pressure kind of exerting against the walls holds the eye in its shape. Okay, there are additional accessory structures that are important in the eye. The eyebrows deflect perspiration from going into the eye. The eyelids and lashes are able to protect the eye by blinking. They also kind of sweep a very fine membrane over the eye to remove particles or anything that might get in the eye, and very fast reflexes. Then the inner lining of that, the eyelid and the area around the eye is called the conjunctiva. That's that membrane. There's a large lacrimal gland that's located kind of just above and lateral to the eye that produces fluid tears that wash the surface of the eye and will drain into the nasal cavity. And then the external eye muscles that move the eye. These are muscles that are attached to the eyeball. There are actually three pair of them on each eye that can move the eye left, right, up, down, and diagonally. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about eye physiology. These are things that happen in the retina. The retina contains the receptor cells for vision. These are photoreceptors. There are rods and cones, and these photoreceptors are distinguished by their ability to detect different types of light. The rods are very sensitive but don't really detect color vision. It's just the presence or absence of light, whereas the cones contain a pigment that's sensitive to one type of light. And so here's a picture of the retina. You can see the central area of the retina, the fovea or macula lutea, that will contain most of the cone cells where we do color vision and has the highest density of receptor cells. And then the rest of the retina is really mostly rods. And you can see over to the left there, the optic nerve where the blood vessels come in. That's our blind spot right up here. And then we have blood vessels coming from that. Down here are the receptor cells. These are cones, and here are rods. Rods are taller. Each rod is hooked up, or several rods are hooked up to one neuron, but each cone receives its own neuron. And the neurons actually sit above the receptor cells. So the light comes down or must come through these neurons before it can hit these cells. Okay, so how do these cells work? Well, in all cases, there's these pigments, rhodopsin or iodopsins, contain a retinol portion and then a opsin portion. And when a photon hits these pigments, it changes the position of the retinol and opsin so that the retinol dissociates. And when this happens, the opsin acts like an enzyme to generate a nerve impulse, and then the rhodopsin will be regenerated later. Here we have um, the color spectrum, and it shows you what each uh, different type of cone where it responds best to light. So there's red, green, and blue cones. Rods will respond to almost any color light. Okay, then another really important thing is that the lens has to change shape so that we can focus things on the retina. When we're looking at things that are far away, the lens is held in a relatively flattened position. And this flattened position refracts the light less so that distant objects can come into focus on the retina. When we're looking at objects that are close by, the lens has to become more round, and so the circular muscles in the ciliary body contract, and that relaxes the tension on the ligaments, and the lens becomes more round, and so it refracts more, and that allows us to focus on near objects. Most disorders in vision have to do with lenses that are too often too round, like that's nearsightedness, or too flat, that's farsightedness. And so we use lenses to correct for that. Concave lenses will help people who are nearsighted, whereas convex lens, a lens that's kind of magnifies things, will help people that are farsighted. Visual processing is handled primarily by information from the retina goes to the brain by way of the optic nerve. But visual processing requires more than just information from the retina. The three motor nerves, oculomotor, trochlear, and abducens, control muscles within the eye that determine the position of the two eyes, that determine the position of the lens or the shape of the lens, the amount of light passing through the iris. So information from those three motor nerves is really important for the cerebral cortex to kind of figure out how far objects are away. And because the two eyes are slightly positioned differently, what each sees on the retina is slightly different. And so those differences allow the brain to figure out how close something is, how fast it's moving, things like that. We also get lots of information from that helps us position the eyes, and that information comes from the inner ear. And so there's lots of connections in the midbrain that help us connect information from the inner ear with the positioning of the eyes. And so this is the vestibulo-ocular reflex, and these things are happening often in the midbrain and in the pons and help us position the eyes correctly. We also have, again, trying to figure out information from the eyes. We have not only information going back to the brain, but we have information crossing over so that the two visual fields can both be looked at different areas of the brain. And so there's this crossing over that happens in the optic chiasma, but some information goes straight back to one side. These visual fields in the back of the brain allow us to kind of reconstruct the external surface on the occipital lobe, which is where vision is processed in the cortex. The occipital lobe also has important connections to the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe, and so we are doing a lot of things when we're using visual information. We're trying to identify what objects are and to position them, and so we tend to be able to see this done in different areas. Okay, so to summarize, the fibrous tunic includes the sclera and the cornea. The vascular tunic includes the choroid, lens, ciliary body, and the iris. The lens changes shape to focus. The iris constricts and dilates to just light levels. The nervous tunic includes the retina, fovea, and optic nerves. Receptor cells contain a pigment that bleaches to start an action potential. Pigment accumulates in low light. The eye sends information to the occipital lobe via the second cranial nerve. There's complex visual processing on. The eye can see it, but the brain's got to make sense of it. Okay,